Hi, this is PrivateerStation, and today we bring you day 546 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Olexiy Arestovych, and now in a new format with Yuriy Romanenko and Nikolay Feldman. Special thanks go today to our members Jamer and Mormule, and of course, thank you Bill for super thanks. Thank you for supporting our channel. And with this, let's go into day 546 and what happened to Prigozhin. Enjoy. Hello everyone, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolay Feldman. This is Military Diary with Olexiy Arestovych. Hello Olexiy, hello Yuri, and we're broadcasting on both of their channels and on Alpha Media. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, click the like button and comment what we are discussing. We have a ton of topics today, and of course we'll start with the main one. Shoigu, Gerasimov, where's Prigozhin? So, where is Prigozhin? Was he on the plane or was he not? There is always a possibility to fall into some conspirology that he is somewhere on the islands now smoking a cigar dipped in rum, and all that was just a scenario played out in a theatrical manner. But I think life is more simple. It appears to be hit with the S-300 missile, and in Tver region, him and Utkin were sentenced to death while flying over Tver region. I promised 2 months after the initial mutiny, but yeah, it's exactly August 23rd, right? 2 months after his mutiny against the Kremlin and Shoigu. And you actually can see the two trails of those missiles on the first video that is surfaced, and I can say that Russians have killed the first Nazi in this war. So their denazification finally hit some target, appropriate target. So how do you think that'll affect things? I think the main side effect of this could be possibly a second march of protest, and we don't know if that'll happen. Let me read from their channel. From Wagner, official message from Wagner. Right now there are rumors about death of our leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. We say it outright that we suspect Putin and his cronies to be behind this murder, and if that is confirmed, we'll organize the second march of protest on Moscow. He'd better be alive, that is in your interests. And frankly, I would advise them to grab Girkin from prison as well. Yeah, no, they don't like this character. They're like Toad and the Snake. Well, yeah, but for the circus, that would make sense if they grab this guy. We can actually quote that to Russian leadership, that and probably to Prigozhin, but he wouldn't hear now, that if you don't pull all the trees out, they'll regrow again. And if he managed to occupy Moscow back then, he would have a very different biography. But he was 3 hours away or something like that, away from Putin's chair. And I'm amazed how people step on the same rakes, into the same traps once again. All he had to remember, Lebed, Kazantsev, Troshev, generals of the First and Second Chechen Wars, or if you go earlier, Grigory Kotovsky, Makhno, those who believed Russian power. And I don't know what the organizers of the second march can hope for, because right now, just for announcing these threats, they're probably putting their lives into the same crosshairs as Prigozhin did. They already signed a death warrant for themselves, so they either need to continue and carry it out, or they have to go and hide. But I do not believe they will continue. I don't think they have enough resources. Now they're being torn apart already. Some of them are in Belarus, some are in Africa. So I don't know whom and how can they gather. I think this story, you think it's finished? Well, after the death of their leader, it will not be as loud as it was before. It will be, in my opinion, difficult to mobilize Wagner to present some serious forces in the Russian society. Perhaps when Putin regime will be wobbling, they'll resurface again, but I don't think they'll be up now. People were talking that it was China that was giving some guarantees to Prigozhin's life, and that's when Lukashenko came out and started talking about negotiations that we laughed about and did not believe in that studio. Do you think China gave any guarantees for Prigozhin's life? What would be the reasonable explanation? That he was providing for some Chinese interests in Africa? Sudan, Mali? I don't think China needs Prigozhin. China's penetration into Africa is old, it's deep, and I don't think they need Prigozhin for that. He was always a representative of Russian oligarchs, that's it. And people were talking that he would not be assassinated because he's a holder of a lot of strings to different purses and knows where the money are hidden. So they either decided to dump all the wallets and purses that he had and all the compromising materials, etc., or they found somebody who can still service those accounts for them without Prigozhin. Do you think it was some play by one of the Russian power ministries or not? We cannot exclude that, but I think it's more simple than that. Because in my opinion, Alexei, Russia now put under possible threat all the infrastructure they have in Africa that they've been building for years. Oh, I think they would have never shut him down unless they have already agreed with somebody. They actually remember before they tried to replace some of their operations with servicemen from Ministry of Defense in Africa. And we see some people in the chat commenting that Professor Solovey is saying that Prigozhin could probably link with one of the towers in Kremlin and repeat the march to Moscow again. Frankly, I think he was going with one with some allies there. Kiriyenko, Patrushev, who was kind of gone during the conflict, Rotenberg brothers. So I think this mutiny was inspired by some group of elites that was behind it. It just failed. Well, yeah, you cannot start a mutiny against leadership and then renegotiate and say that everything is dandy. This doesn't ever happen in any authoritarian country, especially in Russia that is waging war in Ukraine. That was obvious to me from the beginning, so I don't know. It's if somebody decided to believe Putin, now that's a fact of his biography, post-mortem. But there are many people in Russian Federation who are looking up to Prigozhin. A lot of military people, a lot of his own troops and ex-troops. Do you think it'll be reflected on them somehow? No, I don't think so. If you look at the Russian history, remember Razin and the others who were going against Kremlin. Do you know how they ended? They gave the head of the leader to Kremlin and everybody was forgiven. So I think what could have happened here, they could have approached somebody number 3 or 4 or 5 in Wagner, and they would ask, hey, do you also want to die with them, or do you want to lead whatever remains of it? And we'll forgive everybody. By the way, yeah, yesterday there was a piece of news about Surovikin that he was formally replaced, and I think these two are connected. Oh yeah, I heard they are connected. I heard about that, and I think they are connected. He was imprisoned in Lefortovo, in KGB prison, and now they moved him under house arrest. So those who might have had connections with Surovikin, they could see that their military leader is formally removed. So he is not a military leader anymore, and Gerasimov is the only leader of the operation. So Surovikin is out of picture, and I think it's a good proof that it's not an imitation, because I don't think Prigozhin could imitate Surovikin's removal. He could imitate the crash of the plane, but he couldn't imitate removal of Surovikin. Let's remember those leaks where FSB was talking about the need for Putin to replace Shoigu and to do a total mobilization and wage a total war on Ukraine. So if Prigozhin was somewhat a factor that slows down FSB's overtaking control over army, no, I don't think he was playing that role. I think that story after he decided to agree with Kremlin about something, that was over. All these motions in Belarus, in Africa, they were not the facts of foreign policy of Russian Federation. It was more of a personal biography of Prigozhin. They played a little bit in Belarus on the border to scare Lithuania and Poland, and they probably will continue to a degree they can doing it. And it could be partly exerting additional pressure on the Lithuania and Belarusian border. Prigozhin could have been against it, but I don't think he had a say much. And they're basically once again showing that Wagner is managed, and they're showing all the other mutineers that they should not follow this road because it will not end for them well. And Prigozhin wasn't affecting anything during the last couple months. There were some illusions, and that he's still managing something, and he was sort of providing some logistics for Belarus and Africa. Yeah, the horses that cannot run anymore usually get killed. Right, he was an idiot. Yeah, this was a very interesting situation when a person with a archetypical match to expectations of Russian people all of a sudden has smaller balls that he needed to reach Kremlin. And that's pretty much what happened. Well, look, this situation is also about agreements with Putin. Oh, absolutely. This is a perfect illustration of what can you expect when you discuss anything with Putin and agree to about anything. Because what happened? He was in Kremlin. They shook hands. He was returned his awarded weapons and money and other things that were confiscated. And he got the personal guarantee from Putin. So all those people who want to negotiate with Putin abroad or here in Ukraine, we can put Prigozhin as on the display as another successful case of negotiating with Putin. Because, yeah, you can of course agree, but then don't fly on jets, don't touch the handle of the door, check your car before driving, and even then there are no guarantees. So, right, because look, they actually shot him down visibly with an air defense system, with a missile. Oh yeah, so do you think it's a degradation for FSB? Because they usually do some semblance of terrorist act or something, some explosion. Well, they could have. They might have said, have done both. They might have had an explosive on the plane and also shot it down with a missile. Because, by the way, in this case, they also needed to coordinate with military. FSB doesn't shoot S-300 missiles. And military, of course, have their own questions to Prigozhin, so I think it's a collective decision of Russian management, of Russian leadership, and of course, without the order of Putin, no Ministry of Defense would agree with Ministry of with FSB and other power agencies. And by the way, did you notice Peskov, Putin's speaker, is not in the limelight? Yeah, he is on vacation somewhere. So the story is still giving. Prigozhin is still alive. Vladlen Tatarsky reported from the event. Vladlen Tatarsky was one of the correspondents recently assassinated in one of the cafes. I think the death of Prigozhin is sort of a gift to the Day of Independence of Ukraine, actually. Yeah, there are a lot of events, by the way, today. On Poltava, we had a Mi-8 helicopter, military helicopter from Russia that landed. As our special services confirmed, it was a result of their special operation. Pilots brought the helicopter, and 2 people on board were not on this game, were not in on this, so there was a bit of a struggle, and the remaining crew landed the helicopter in Poltava, so now we have a new helicopter. If it is given to the Russian detachments fighting on the front, then anti-Putin Russian forces now have their own aviation. And we also destroyed S-400 complex in the northwest part of the Crimean front, and we also destroyed a very remarkable radio electronic interference station, actually a remarkable station made by Russian military called Podlyot that detects usually a low-flying types of craft, so UAVs and others. And by the way, in the morning, Ministry of Defense of Russia stated that they sunk one of our ships, but we reported later that no, the ship is still alive, and actually we damaged the plane that tried to destroy that ship. And now people are asking questions. What was used to control visually for the hit of S-400? Because usually they do scan the skies to make sure there is no UAV or anything, and yet the thing was recorded. So why did S-400 and Patriot not see that when they were destroyed? What is it talking about? Well, it means that we have some new measures we can use to work in Crimea, and that the curious factor is that their defense did not only see what was hitting them, bomb, missile, or whatever, but it failed to see the UAV that was filming it. So destruction of these technical means, S-400, cool radio electronic interference station. What level is it? Do you think it changes the situation on the front? No, it's not strategic, it's operative. And why do you make a hole? You make a hole, you poke a hole in their defense line in order to push something through that hole, right? So maybe something we'll see tomorrow. Moscow City was evacuated again, right? So they had something there as well. So day is bright today. By the way, I'm also reading some news here about Prigozhin. They're saying that maybe his plane was shot down in the automatic mode. Well, in this case, yeah, there are some that work in fully automatic mode, but in this case, it's a warning to all jets flying in Russia. Yeah, I would say it doesn't matter if it's automatic or not. All the private jets flying across territory of Russia think twice or thrice do you want to fly over, because they shoot whatever they want to shoot. So that's a very rich story. Yeah, Wagner indeed officially confirmed that Prigozhin and his second-in-command, Utkin, with the call sign Wagner, was on that plane that was shot down. Okay, so everybody wants a little public service announcement. Please click the like button. We already have about 80,000 watching us live on all of our channels that are streaming live. Do not forget to share it, and that helps us to promote the information further. There is a suggestion now to go to the map of the front, and since we did a very deep dive last time, we'll talk about changes, right? So they have a rotation here on the left bank. They're trying to bring new troops that are supposed to remove the purchase that we have on the left bank, but by the numbers you can see on the map, you can tell where they are. What's surprising is that it is our light infantry that is holding these lands, and look at the numbers they have. Look at what troops they've got on this side. This huge group could actually be here in Kherson, making our tasks more difficult. But we're holding it on the left bank, so kudos to our people. Now, let's talk about Robotina. So first, we saw the video today of our soldiers with the flag in Robotina, that they liberated that settlement. Russian side is commenting that Novoprokopovka, the next settlement, is already systematically being attacked by Ukrainian troops. And Russians are screaming that damned Ukrainians are already encircling their positions from the left and on the right on this part of the front. Deep state map is a bit slower, so we can consider that you can see this changes probably a few days later here. And if you look down, there is a Takmak here. There is encircled with fortifications, a very significant communication post. And see how far it is to Melitopol? Yeah, these two spots, Takmak and this next one. 1, 2, 3, you can see them under the line. So these will be the spots that the fight will go for. If we manage to take them, then they pretty much have lost Kherson front. I'm not opening any military secret here, they understand that. I'm just explaining that to civilians. You see if that diamond is surrounded by trenches, that means it's a fortified logistics. And here they also have some trouble near Staromayorska, Staromlinovka, Priutnaya. Let me zoom. Okay, yeah, Priutnaya is at 10, 11 o'clock on the front. They start to withdraw their troops towards Lyubimovka down south. You can see the shape of the front indicating that they are being pushed on different sides, and this is a good indicator of how we do it. We shift our attack accent from one to another. And they've been building some defense here, considering the river, and Stramlinovka is on this side, on this bank of the river, so they were afraid that we might cross it and go on the other side. So they created additional line of defense. And if you look further, this line of defense is now being encircled further on the right, and that's where their 5th Tank Brigade is. So they're now concerned, and they're already being thrown into the fight. And behind that, you can see it's pretty empty, right? So that looks like operative freedom right there. And as our troops confirmed, they did shift their effort, and Volodin and Lyubinovka, they're two important, closest to the front logistics hubs. So if we destroy those, they'll have a very difficult situation here. And we're trying to flank them. They have to react to that. They already at their capacity, and I think the smoke is coming out of their ears right now, because in order to really stop our motion over here in the south and up there a little bit to the north, they need to take some forces from somewhere to stop it. And most likely, if they will take them, they'll take it from Svatovo-Kupinska in the northwest part of the front. And you remember they started that motion in the northwest to make us shift our troops to the northwest, but now they have to actually move their troops down south from there if they want to stop us in the south. So, that game can be played by both. We also keep some strategic threat near Vuhledar, and at any moment we can increase that, and there are not much fortifications on this line, you can see, right? So they have to be guessing, because if we throw more resources and if we add another direction, all of a sudden they need not 3-4 brigades, but 5 or 7 brigades to try to stop us. In Marinka, there is no changes. Avdiivka, same thing, they're trying to flank it, but it doesn't quite work because we have very well fortified regions since 2014. This was the area of defense of Donetsk airport. Everything was dug and fortified with concrete from 7 years ago, actually. Yeah, 7 years ago. So, continues fighting near Kurdyumovka. We continue pressing slowly, despite some resistance, and they keep counterattacking as well. Same thing in Yagodna, Berhovka, Oreha, Vasilievka, ongoing fighting daily. Their task is to hold, and we're trying to encircle Bakhmut in the north and in the south. See that road that goes here? Our defense started to falter when they cut this road, so whenever we cut this road, their defense will start falling as well. Even though I'm not a fan of a lot of effort on Bakhmut direction. I'd rather put more people in the south. Bilogorovka, they're trying to storm that area. If they succeed, they could get good positions. And their key task here is try to close flanks of the northern group, that is in Severodonetsk, and this one in the south. That perch is very disturbing for them, so that's what we make sure we need to hold. Serebryanskaya forestry is still heavy fighting. At least that's what we can read in the open media. I don't know if that's our disinformation or not, but the fights continue. And in the general northwest, so on this line, there is a lot of fighting. When they failed here, down in the south, and here, they moved it further to the north, towards Kupinsk, and they were saying that they got Sinkovka, a small settlement to the north of Kupinsk. Our troops do not confirm them taking that, and we evacuated all 4 citizens who are living in that settlement, but and also showed that we still have it. Actually, the map you can see still shows it. They're trying to get their front line to that water reservoir. There are some bridges, railroads, so that's logistics piece that they do want to have, and they're trying to get it. But I'm saying that if they will continue fighting like that, their ideation is already torn inside out. So instead of having us throw our troops to the northwest, they will have to throw some troops from the northwest down south. At least we already observed some interesting motion there in the northwest corner, and we suspect that some part of that reorganization will be resulting in pushing these troops to the south. to support. Again, this is not a giddy statement on our behalf that we're so successful. This is difficult because summer is hot, and imagine even here in Kiev, you walk outside, it's hot, right? And now you're walking outside there in the south and also being shot at with all the gear and the bulletproof and helmet. This is a dog work. There's nothing worse than nothing harder than the work of infantry in this planet. But yeah, still following Russian sources, we're not using ours, that indeed they are talking about a lot of problems. That's Russians who are talking that they need to throw more reserves to that front, and that they already have some things moving there. So these are the changes during the last 2 days. See, last time we did not talk about that layer of fortifications we didn't talk about the fortification lines in the south. Okay, we can zoom into the fortified positions. These are typical anti-tank fortifications, so-called dragon teeth, covered with minefields and with additional fire positions, so they can control the minefields and the areas of approach. So everything is by the book, generally speaking. The logic is when our troops are coming over, we run into the minefield. When we try to figure out how far and where does the mine go, they are supposed to start hitting us with guided missiles on our armor, and then they have some air superiority to attack us from air, and then at the end their infantry with some armor go out also and finish us. So ideally, what should have happened, we need to destroy their artillery fully, so they would not be able to provide any cover. And then with small groups of infantry, we can continue pushing forward and then get the armor too. And that's roughly what we're doing. We've started a little differently, but now that's what we're doing. We don't have artillery advantage overall, but we have qualitative advantage. So we're surgically removing their artillery positions in order to provide conditions for us to continue advancing. I would not name the official numbers, but basically we're about 4 or 5 times less in numbers attacking Russian positions. This is an unknown proposition in military history when 1/5 of the force is successfully attacking something 5 times bigger than themselves. So they initially had some zone before the first line. We crossed that. We broke through the first line. Then there is a second line of defense, and then the third closer to Tokmak. And the key towns are are surrounded by fortifications, because that's where they expect the hits on the flanks. See, they're protecting the road junction from all sides. So people were preparing. They had 9 months to prepare. Anyone in the rank of major and above understands what they need to defend and how to defend that, so that's what they were doing. And here you can do 2 things. You can either go around, or you can hit up front and keep breaking and opening their defense lines. Because if your defense line is broken, there is not much you can do once we break through. And once again, I want to remind that these defense lines are being defended by people, not by fortifications themselves. So if they already wasted a ton of them on us, exerting an effort to stop us and slow us down, then the second and third line would not be as much of an obstacle as the first. So one should understand that anti-tank trench without any fire cover is not an anti-tank trench, it's just a ditch. So you mentioned before that given a month in the current situation, Russian army will likely crack, right, and crumble. Somewhere here in the south, yes, I would predict somewhere here. We either find a successful hole to break a breach to do here near Staromlynovka, or maybe Lubinovka-Volodina, a little bit to the center. But one way or another, we'll find a way to break through. So what the successful breakthrough looks like is when we break through and they cannot stop us. because right now we are breaking through a little bit and they throw troops to stop us, and that's where we grind through. But a true breakthrough is when they have nobody to stop us. So that's what I expect to happen between now and October. And looking at the tempo of this front, we would need to be very unlucky, like, I don't know, Black Swan 2 event, for us to not have that success. And looking at the stages of how we do that, it shows that we are successfully executing that plan. In order to continue stopping us here, they need 3 to 4 brigades, and where do they take them from? Right. So last time you did mention that you don't want us to take Bakhmut by any means necessary, right? Yeah, indeed. So it appears that while they were fortifying that line in the south, they were distracting us with the Bakhmut attacks, right? Yeah, sure, but one can also ask, what have we been doing for these 9 months? If they have dug so many trenches over there, why did not we do that in the northwest? Because that's their line of defense. Where's ours? Who precluded us from digging just as many Surovikin trenches and concrete fortifications on this line? Do we not have any concrete in the country? And that's the question that should be asked, because in 17 months of war, basically nowhere we established, not a single part of the front, we established any new fortification lines, similar to what Russia was building. So my question is why? We cannot create Todd's army from the unemployed? Guys, we guarantee you do not get to the front. You're being fed, you're getting some money paid, and you just build our fortifications up. So you can also, by the way, at the end of the war, you can say you did fight. You did not fight the hot war on the front, but you were fighting on the front, digging the trenches and fortifications. And we will need that fortification line later, in 10 or 20 years. There's the threat of Russia never disappears. If the war happens 10 years later again, it'll be going in the same direction. So why not we fortifying the front lines? And this is a big problem that I see. Because they've been digging for 9 months, we could have been digging for 9 months. Why we're not pouring concrete and putting landmines? All right, so we're done with the map. We have a ton of other news and questions. And question number 1. So, talking of Dugin, and I think it's surfacing up every 3 months, that press conference with Dugin, Korchinsky. Can you please elaborate? How did you manage to have a video, an officer of Intel, that recording of you and Dugin at the same press conference years back? There is, Arabic saying, when you said once, I trusted you. When you said twice, I started being concerned. When you said 3 times, I completely distrust you, disbelieve you. Can I say for you? Yeah, sure, you can take that banner. I do not understand why people do not pay attention that back in 2008, you were talking about certain threats that are being exerted from Russia, and you're actually pointing on the border and saying where and how the attacks might ensue. So you, as a result of these conferences and conversations with Dugin and the rest, are actually raising alarm here in Ukraine. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Those people who are asking this question about the press conference, send an inquiry to Intel services. Ask about my position. Who was Arestovych during that conference? What was his position? Where was his service? Where was he working? You can send an official congressman inquiry. And if they think that officer of Intel can just go to Moscow and do press conferences there, then they're completely detached from reality. And they can advise them a good psychotherapist. I can even give some of the sessions myself and give them a good discount. The special discount for those ones, plus 100%. But, okay, if we talk about the situation back in the days, we were working very close with those movements in Russia, those ultra movements, including the Nashi motion, ours group. So we were talking to them extensively and communicating with them extensively. And these guys actually became the backbone of the Russian Spring in Donbass, and they were participating. Back in 2005, 2008, we already had the list of those people. We already had them as a list of possible participants of these events. And they played their role in 2014, 2015. And I think these lists are still playing a certain role because we have been using them also to counter their activities. I can tell some things, I cannot share everything. So all these accusations, I'm tired of that. You know, the problem of Ukrainian political life? It is very shallow. I think it's short memory. No, I think it's just very shallow attacks. I could imagine Congress had Senate hearings in the United States about that. That would be much deeper. And here it's just one dig away, one shovel dig away. Do you think, can you guess how many times in my life Ukrainian special services check my background? I don't know the protocols, how many. I can tell you way more than they would expect, and way more times that they even have said my last name. And you know, they keep attacking though. He was talking to Dugin in that press conference, that Russian ultra nationalist, and he's giving some press conferences, and he's making weird statement that not everybody in Ukraine is in agreement with. So, usual counter question: do you think I'm being invited to all these prestigious conferences in Europe this year and other places where we need to push our agenda because I was sitting and talking with Dugin, because I am a figure of concern for our intel? Right, yeah, put him to talk to Hodges. Exactly. So that's just funny. Out of my deep love to you and our viewers, I'm talking about it for the second time. Usually I'm just tired about this topic. Here's a funny thing. So, yeah, I'm reading, somebody quoted Dugin here that he did mention that Olexiy is a smart fella and he would be good in the service to the Russian Empire. So please do not keep him on air, guys. Do not let him go anywhere. Yeah, you know, one more statement I want to put here. I want to say that I consider Dugin and all these Russian figures very shallow, very small. I cannot, with my current position and with my current ambitions, serve any of these plans. Arestovych, one cannot combine two views, right? Arestovych cannot be a politically ambitious leader in Ukraine and at the same time be a figure that would aspire to work with Dugin and build some Russian empire under somebody. I'm not building things under anybody. I'm trying to build my own things. Right, they can say you're an actor, of course. That's the usual card. That's what they bring up. Do not send him anywhere because he is an actor, because he may not be showing his true colors. Okay, let's go to a different topic. Last firing of Surovikin. Is Gerasimov a more difficult foe than Surovikin? So Gerasimov is now alone carrying that burden. Oh, he was always responsible for that. He was the leader of their command. This is their Zaluzhny or their Mili. One more thing about Prigozhin's plane. It fell near one of the military positions, and there's a anti-air defense system in the area. And there are they discovered 8 bodies. One body is missing a head, another has a face severely destroyed. So that's interesting. And you know, in these situations when somebody important dies in the event like such, I would also look carefully at the first responders, because very often first responders are the group that actually destroyed the vehicle. That's at least what happens during the big terrorist events with the vehicles. So always check the first responders, because some of them may be there to finish off the survivors. Here's another news that Musk indeed talked with Putin, and he lied that he did not talk to Putin, so there may be some consequences. I don't know where from, maybe from Department of State, but how? He should have registered this conversation. He probably should have, at least he should have reported about this conversation. And if he said no, but later it became a yes, that's a concern. But that's the condition of the minds on the West. Musk is one of the richest people in the world. He's an innovative engineer who's dreaming about other planets and all, right? The topics that I do like personally. 3, he is also representative of so-called the third path in the United States. Not Republicans, not Democrats, not rednecks or BLMs, a third path, some alternative, etc. Neil Ferguson, Peterson, all these conservative heads in the West kind of belong loosely to that group. And according to his tweets, he is just getting out of the intellectual cradle, and his system of belief is not withstanding the check by reality. Because, yeah, you see how he put there? He said, I had a great conversation with Putin, and yeah, great conversation with Putin, exactly. In these situations, I remember that famous 5 in Britain. Kim Philby was an intel officer who was in charge of fighting Russian spies in Britain, and he actually was a Russian spy. He also got 4 more agents under him, and these 5, they did a lot of harm to the British service that they still consider is ongoing, has some ongoing after effects. One of them almost became a relative of Churchill. These Cambridge 5, they were cream of the cream of British aristocracy, and they were converted by some guys from Voronezh, some average Russian guys who learned English and went to Britain to do that. So when I teach my classes and talk on seminars, I often ask, how did simple guys from Voronezh or Kharkov manage to, or from wherever they were, manage to talk to top level of British aristocracy who've been in the 22nd generation of nobility in Britain. Just the usual guys who joined special services and started learning how to do that. How do you think they got them? Naivete? This story just keeps repeating over and over again. Ideology? Yeah. Leftism is a very dangerous thing. And the moment the left idea has bit a person's mind, then any guy from Voronezh trained to be somewhat likable, and they're being taught to be likable, will finish them, will devour them in their entirety. So when they tell us about those how Americans are fighting with the leftists, like McCarthyism and others, I would say United States went on such a narrow edge with that Communist Party. You can actually see that in Oppenheimer, how close they were to that, to complete fiasco and having the leftism winning in the country. These left ideas were not from Russia. These left ideas actually were generated on the West, and they devoured Russia. So Russia was, the Soviet Union it was easy for them to use these same ideas to convert people in the West. Same thing about colonialism, anti-colonialism, that BRICS summit in South African Republic, when instead of Putin's speech, they turned on the teleprompter that was giving Putin's ideas. So, and the president of South Africa, after looking at these teleprompter notes, said, okay, well, since that concluded Putin's statement, let's go to actual work. people will be falling into the same pitfalls over and over again. And Musk, a guy with some right ideas and some ideations that he heard from Peterson, from Ferguson, and other leaders of conservative movement, and they hear that thing, he hears these things from Putin. They're right conservatives, they're talking about these same things, and the problem is that he doesn't have a full circle of education where he can distinguish what Putin is using against him versus the actual ideas that permeate the right ecosphere. So it's the similar situation when people here in Ukraine are looking at a situation with Russia, and then they say that Arestovych probably might be an agent. So they're forgetting about all these events that happened before in 2008 and 2014, about my warnings of the war with Russia. So Musk in this case is a sort of, being the rich man as he is that usual fella who, regardless of being genius, engineer, leader of a wonderful company or several companies, or even if you're a leader of British Special Service, it still remains your Achilles heel, because if you don't have your own world structure, world system that is very stable, it is easy to catch you on certain pieces of that puzzle. And Musk is a case and study for that. With his tweets about Russia will win, it's impossible to win over Russia. And yeah, he's not alone. There is a whole sleuth of other figures who also fall for the same thing. They're talking about us now in the chat. This group will probably fall apart again. Everybody likes to talk, and Arestovych is such a narcissistic fellow, he'll probably pull the blanket onto himself, and everybody else will leave. Yeah, right, let's form a party and call it a narcissist party. Yeah, that'll be a Western trend. All right. There was another news from Britain about Wagner. They were recognized. So Britain is going to recognize Wagner as a terrorist group, as a terrorist organization. Financial Times reported. Yeah, right, they're recognizing it now as a terrorist group, and Wagner is pretty much gone now, right? Yeah, let's play conspirology. Perhaps that was concerted. Oh yeah, British knew in advance, and maybe they did the special operation over Tver and launched 2 Russian S-300s. Well, right, yeah. Russian air defense systems under control of British special services. I have another question to ask. Do you think Putin will be using jets in Russia? Because you never know which missile goes where, right? I think army can have some beef with Putin as well, not only with Prigozhin. You cannot put one FSB officer for each launch complex, right? Yeah, actually you can. You probably can. You know, I'm still surprised. They're using S-300s to shoot one person. Yeah, you know, Putin will probably use not jets. He'll probably use the railroad. He likes railroads. Yeah, I think he needs to ensure his safety. He now needs to put special FSB trained officers on each of air defense system, because they also need to be trained, by the way, so they understand what's happening. Because otherwise, military could just trick them and say, we're just defending Vladimir's jet from the evil drones. And oops, now the missile hit everything. Yeah, so jokes aside, we do hope Ukrainian drones get there more often. If you look deeper into that story of Wagner and its recognition as a terrorist organization in light of Niger and events happening in Africa, do you think that would have been helpful to the coalition in Africa, to that ECOWAS group? Yeah, this group is looking towards France and Europe. They actually named the date of invasion, by the way, or their operation, because French do not want to use their own hands in this, and they want Africans to work for themselves. In the third country that they're losing, they're still trying to use that same approach. And here we have questions from military experts if the army will be enough, Nigerian army will be enough to succeed, if they do have enough forces to succeed, because in the north there are different tribes, and some of them are representatives of a different tribe that are living in the north, but the other is a mixed tribe that exists on both sides of the border, so the military will have to be fighting against their own relatives, and they have questions. Experts bring questions if they will do that. So, yeah, they were flying there, they were trying to agree on some things, but in my opinion, the West has a lot of questions to answer. As somebody reported, Prigozhin died as a result of falling from height. Yeah, gravity was the reason of his death. Right. Let's look at BRICS. There were several statements made on this summit, some of them very serious. For example, Xi Jinping said that international agreements need to be written jointly by leaders, by those who have enough muscles and authority. And it appears that BRICS is becoming more and more a vehicle for Chinese politics, or as they call Chinese politics, influence on the global south. It will be the voice of the countries that are developing, and the key is their development, and that's the angle. They want to create bank structures for BRICS in order to credit the countries that need that. BRICS countries will work on de-dollarization, so they would not fear their money being confiscated by European and American authorities. So now they're trying to aggregate countries who have issues with the United States or who are neutral. Look, this story is also a teachable moment for us, because India and China, they actually have pretty bad relations overall, but yet they're in the same organization and they're working together in that organization. Because here in Ukraine, how people think, if we are at odds with somebody, we cannot be working with them, right? So life is more rich than that. India and China are enemies, and they're together solving issues of how to work and how to figure their ways when they need to make decisions that don't go together with the global West, so to say. So the main idea of BRICS is how to cover their economies from possible sanctions, how to maybe use Chinese yuan as the reserve currency for that group, and also that China is tracing another angle there to prevent or prolong the time they have until the crisis, economic crisis that's looming over them. And now they're also talking about other ways how to add new countries to BRICS. But by the way, one of the topics in BRICS is putting Russia down. Chinese were very harsh on Putin today. They said that, I'm just loosely translating that, the country that cannot provide their key interests cannot be considered serious players in the world. And India, by the way, in that time landed their station on the moon. Their robotic station just landed on the moon. And for those who don't know, Chinese are using a lot of Russian technology for their space program, while Indians have their own space program. They started from scratch and they started themselves. And they successfully landed the lander. So on the eve of BRICS, one of the agendas in BRICS is also space. They want to create their own space program equivalent to the Western achievements. So Russian station smashed in the moon, and China smirked about that, but Indians landed successfully. And India will probably be calling upon uniting efforts in the global space program. And I think what we're seeing is a revival of a bipolar world. And Xi Jinping actually came out with an appeal to revive the world with different poles, where some of the demands are written by the countries who are not part of the current hegemony. And China and Xi Jinping are calling upon the new organization to not use the hierarchy of the old world and colonial and other vassal relations, but each country will be playing an important role, and adding countries like Iran, Indonesia to China, India, and the rest, it will be a more balanced group with of the global south, so to say, and potentially that could be a new group. Okay, so we have a new global south looking at their interests against the interests of the West. What is the West doing? The West is talking about apologizing and trying to not interfere. You know, when we're pushing so hard to join the West, of course, I don't want us to stop that motion, because I think we can actually alter that probably in a good way. But that West, we need to understand the West of Kipling, the West of all these figures that we remember from history, it doesn't exist anymore for over 100 years, because we need to understand that whenever we break through to the West and join them, we may find just BLM and Macron, who is afraid to even stand for their interests in Africa. So we can see that global south is rather rapidly consolidating, and the overall higher plane of interest is so important for them that even countries at very difficult relations, such as India and China, they can forget about these qualms and they can rise above that. And that actually shows the level of thinking that the global south is using to understand world problems. So they have their own angle and they have their own school of how to look at political things. And that's important, because when the country gets the opportunity to play globally, when you have enough resources, then you actually can start thinking about global processes, and you have to think about them. When you start influencing things, then that's when you actually get power. Not when you start to declare yourself independent. No, not just putting yourself on a map doesn't really do that. Of course, the war with Russia indeed helped us to become independent and to start thinking the right way. But one can see that BRICS also, by the way, is not supporting of Russia. And I think Russia will be given a sort of global Huckleberry Finn position, because they do not trust Russia. They cannot trust Russia to not jump to the arms of the West. Global South doesn't think that they can trust Russia to not join the West, so they don't want to give Russia too much power, and they're not really supporting them. Because if, let's say, Khodorkovsky or somebody will become the leader of future Russia, he might as well turn Russia to be closer to the West and not to the South. So they're also solving that same complex of tasks, try to engage her, but to not let her run away to the West. And the BRICS are doing essentially the same as the West is doing, to engage Russia, but to not let it run to China. And this is a colossal and historical loss for Russia, because just 2 years ago, before this war, they were a much more serious country with a more serious position that was using a certain playbook. They were playing a bridge game here, bridging BRICS, being that joint link between the global West and global South. And they flushed everything down the toilet, and Ukrainian infantry is putting now a fat dot onto their political ambitions. And now Russia is being actively pushed down, even just looking at the statements on this summit. And this is a huge lesson for us here in Ukraine, because if the West succeeds and Russia somehow, at the end of it, becomes part of the West, what BRICS are afraid of or concerned with, then whom are we going to be with Russia? Allies? Via the big Western umbrella? This is about the world being more complex. That China-India case is showing how very not one-sided things are. So, yeah, these screams that Arestovych is trying to engage Ukraine to go a different route, it is not about that. We're talking about opportunities that we need to look for with the West. Yeah, we are part of the West. the West recognizes us. In the Vilnius summit, they did say that, yeah, we are part of the West. They're recognizing it now. But we need to understand that the West has a ton of their own problems. First of all, they're lacking a global project for the world. What does the West want? Global South does have an agenda for the world. Global West doesn't. So when we're joining Global West, we need to understand that they have their own ailment that doesn't allow them to have any huge plan for the world, anything forward-looking. And there are some conspiracy theories that they do, but no, there is nothing. And I think besides all these packages of support and military support, we will be facing an ideological dead end as a part of the Global West. And as a part of the Global West, we'll have to be looking for different ways out of this situation. And maybe we can bring that initiative, that new horizons to the West. Yeah, I think it'll be our duty to try to bring that in. Because people do bring it to me. Olexiy, how do you see your appeal to the new civilization when you're trying to just join the West? Well, the West actually, I say, has an option to have different views there. It doesn't have to be just leftist or a left Trotskyist West. If that leftist game continues for another 50 years with the West, then Global South will just eat up whatever remains of the West at the end of it. We don't want that. We don't want to be in juxtaposition with the Global South either. We do want to give humanity new goals and new development vectors, and perhaps help join the South and the West in certain angles. Two more aspects that people asked to comment today upon is Zelensky's statement about mobilization. He did make that in Crimean platform. And I'm quoting here in Ukrainian language. Basically, this was a nod to the society that mobilization will be ramping up. Our objective circumstances on the front demand that. And basically, he's telling the population that they'll be mobilized in a polite manner. They will not be forced in the car. But otherwise, the effort will continue, yeah. And the second statement by Zelensky about Crimea being Ukrainian and Ukraine fighting for their territories, and we're not exchanging our territories for membership in any European organization. And he actually did invite foreign investors to consider going to Crimea under Ukraine soon whenever we liberate that. This is a strong position. This is a very strong position for negotiations. Even if, imagine, negotiations start tomorrow, this is our starting position and we cannot change that. Yeah, then go look for other means and measures to convince us, right? So that's a good story. But in our technical situation right now, we cannot get to the borders of 91. Maybe in half a year we can do that, but right now we can't. We need times more support from the West, and we need to change certain flows in our military system of how we use certain weaponry. So about the sanctions, important piece of news. Russia can still get components to repair their jets through relatives and other channels that they have abroad. This was brought in as a commentary to the story about Boeing and Airbus, who did not fully reject the Russian market despite the sanctions. So I wanted to bring some historic perspective here. Vietnamese and Chinese conflict. So Vietnamese special services, before the conflict started, back in '64, the war started in the mid-'70s, so about 10 years before that, they already were reacting and saying that China is growing the network of their influence in Vietnam. So when I was in Moscow, back 2008, remember, 2005, I was already bringing these things back then and saying Moscow has a program of annexing Ukraine. It's a long story. 12 to 15 years they were preparing a strong invasion. Things don't happen in 5 days or 5 years. So, same story with sanctions. there are intermediary companies that provide special equipment for Russian military complex. They were propped up in 2007, 2009 in Europe, and it was usually done the way that, some Russian girl marries a Swiss citizen, then she divorces him, marries a Finn, and marries an Italian, and then she has an interesting biography which is difficult to trace because she changed her last name 3 times. It's difficult to trace her as Russian. And then another guy comes over who is also from Tver gubernia or somewhere deep in Russia, but he was for 15 or 20 years overseas, and he already has different names like Julio Gonzalez or something. And then some Julio and Maria Baruta marry, and they organize a company that is selling spare parts for Russian equipment to be restored or built. And they're not even selling it to Russia, they're selling it to Algeria, Algeria is selling it to Hungary, Hungary to Taiwan, Taiwan to China, China to Russia. And, after 5 or 10 companies, they're not even selling it directly to Russia. And that system was being built for 10 years already, and it's still working now. But we still have to say that sanctions are effective on many of the nomenclature items. Their supply lines are down by 40%, so it does affect quite a bit of their production. And on some other items, they grew 400 times microchips. So, love is not just because you have to continue working on it. We have to continue working on sanctions. So Boeing and Airbus, these are world global leaders in aviation, and they still refused to not use the gray lines to supply Russia. Let me quote Karl Marx here. If profit is 300%, there is no crime that capital will not go to. And also I can quote Lenin when he was asked, where will you take money to fight imperialism? He said, imperialists will sell us the ropes that will hang them on. So this is the same lesson for the West that doesn't make conclusions from these things. Yeah, they partly do right things, but what I'm saying is they need to continue to keep fighting with that. Because just a couple of years ago, I want to remind you, during COVID times, they refused the Magna Carta, the achievements of revolution, all the achievements that they got in Rome, in ancient Greece. They sold everything for 15 minutes, everything that their forefathers were earning during thousands of years. They gave up during the strong epidemic of respiratory illness. So this is something one needs to continue fighting for. Your freedoms, you will continue to fight for them day after day, year after year. So the West needs to continue doing that, and it needs to be pushed to continue fighting for that. And that's what I'm trying to do in the international conferences with my participation. Here's another question. So that's a funny one. How did Russian Intel manage to let Olexiy on that summit to talk together with Dugin? Because they did know that he is an Intel officer. Well, one needs to know how to play that, right? That's not simple. That's playing a double. There's a special way that you do that. There's a way to play. You can play double agent. You basically come to Kolya and say, Kolya, I hate Yura. And then you come to Yura and say, Yura, I hate Kolya, let's work against him. And on one hand, you don't want to believe me. On the other hand, how else do you get benefits? You need to work with me. So there's only one way to get into another special service, is if you pretend to be their friend. And they will take a risk in order to make sure that they maybe will have somebody in the other service. And Dugin was thinking that he was offering me a service for the great empire, and it turned out to be otherwise. And those people who played active roles in Donetsk and Lugansk in the initial phase of war 7 or 8 years ago, that's the echoes of my visit back to Seliger and Moscow and that conference, that many of them did not survive to today. Okay, so we do have 120-something thousand watching us. That definitely helps to continue clicking the likes and subscribes. So I once again remind everybody to please do that. And you see, it's exciting. Olexiy gives interesting answers to interesting questions. So ask more questions. We will be glad to answer. You wanted to say something, Olexiy? Yeah, I'm just upset about the level of political discussion in Ukraine, public discussion in Ukraine. All that so-called political fight against agents of influence of Russia. This is so shallow. Yeah. God forgive me. All right. I want to go back to that Mi-8 helicopter once we have 5 more minutes, I think. The one that we got from Russian side. How important is that operation as a signal? It is important. So first of all, we showed that we can do that. We can provide the interests for those people who managed to help us. So what I hear, the person got the money that he was promised for the helicopter, and his family is safe and secure, and they have passports of other countries already. So transfer of a jet, transfer of any flying vehicle was always a special operation, was always something special. Remember, Belenko took MiG-25 to across the border of Soviet Union in Asia. So all that, I know, will be cut in our media and will be probably used against Chervinsky, who was supposedly going to do the same operation. Not everything is so simple there, but we'll know more details about it later. So, talking about this operation and its success, do you think we could use it as a platform to turn to Russian pilots and Russian military? Okay, sure, let's do that. Dear, really expensive Russian servicemen, you will cost us money, because if you pilot your vehicle and across the border and land it on the Ukrainian airfield, you will become part of those who are trying to approach the future of a new Russia, who are trying to bring closer the end of this war, and new Russia as a democratic country that is not an enemy to its neighbors. And we do have Legion of Freedom of Russia and Russian Volunteer Corps, which are troops of Russian Federation and the Ukrainian front of new Russia, not Putin's Russia, that is fighting against Putin regime. So you can either come and join their ranks, or you can come get the money for transfer of the vehicle, and there'll be a special protective program involved, so you'll get passports of a different country, and you and your family will be free and will be living in better conditions than under oppressive regime. So think about it thrice. And there was a joke now that Olexiy back in 2005 was also doing his visit, was working with the pilot of that Mi-8 helicopter. Yeah, right, the pilot was probably 5 years old at that time. But yeah, sure. So, Russian army for the last few days was hitting schools, kindergartens. Yeah, indeed. The director of school died, some kids got wounded. What do you think Russia wants with these military crimes? What are they trying to achieve? I think there are two things possible. First of all, could be they're thinking about the Ukrainian military hiding there, because you can possibly place your troops there, right? In school, kindergarten. But we're not using schools and kindergartens for that. But they do have agents who just make money, and they could have pointed towards the school and said, hey, shoot that. And of course, they could have just missed. Third one, though, as an opportunity, could be a program to preclude us placing any military targets in the schools in the future. And maybe to alienate some of our population from supporting our military, because they could address our military, hey, don't come to our village, don't place your troops in our schools and our public establishments. But given that they keep hitting time and time again schools and kindergartens, that seems like it's systemic. This is not mistakes. This seems like it's a systemic approach, and they're probably trying to kick off some effort to cause some rift between population and Ukrainian army. But I have to say that, dear citizens, our army is protecting you from Russians trying to kill you. So do not lose that perspective. These are Russian missiles, and these are Russians that are hitting your kindergarten, not our military. All right, we have significant numbers watching us. Please do not forget to subscribe to Yuriy Romanenko channel, to Olexiy Arestovych, share links to our streams, and of course subscribe to the PrivateerStation if you are listening or watching that in English language. Do you have any other questions? No, I think we're good. Let's not overload people with information. I think we're good. It's midweek. We have more news for the weekend, for the Saturday stream. Everybody, congrats with the day of Ukrainian flag. Tomorrow is the Independence Day, and this is our great holiday. This is dear to us, and that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Olexiy. Thank you, Yuriy. Thank you, dear viewers.